Have you ever looked at someone and seen only their uniform? The crisp apron of a waitress, the worn overalls of a janitor, the simple t-shirt of a delivery driver. Have you ever let that uniform define them, writing their entire story in your mind before they've even spoken a word? We all do it. It's a shortcut our brains take. But sometimes, that shortcut leads us away from discovering something truly extraordinary. It makes us blind to the hidden gems that walk among us, their brilliance veiled by the humble cloth of their profession. This is a story about one such moment, about a splash of wine that washed away a facade, revealing a truth that would change everything. It's a story about what happens when someone finally decides to look past the uniform and see the person wearing it. It began in the hushed, gilded sanctuary of the Elysian, a restaurant where wealth was the main currency and respect was a commodity sold only to the highest bidder. Here, among the clinking of crystal and the low murmur of powerful conversations, worked Alara. To the patrons, she was a ghost in a black apron, a pair of hands that refilled water glasses and cleared away finished plates. She moved with a quiet efficiency that was born of exhaustion and necessity. Her steps were light, her presence deliberately unobtrusive. She had mastered the art of being invisible because, in a place like this, invisibility was a form of self-preservation. But behind her practiced, neutral smile was a mind sharp as a diamond and a heart heavy with the weight of a life lived on the margins. Every tip she earned was a small victory against the tide of her mother's mounting medical bills, every long shift a prayer for a tomorrow that might be a little easier than today. She didn't dream of riches, she dreamed of relief. On this particular evening, a new constellation of power had settled at her most prominent table. Khalid Al-Jamil, heir to a global empire, sat enthroned amidst a court of fawning friends. His laughter was loud, a sharp, arrogant sound that sliced through the restaurant's carefully curated ambience. He wore a watch that could have paid for Alara's mother's surgery 10 times over, and he wore it with the casual indifference of someone who had never known a day of want. Alara approached the table, her water pitcher held steady. As she leaned in to refill a glass, one of Khalid's companions gestured wildly, bumping her arm. It was a tiny, fractional movement, but it was enough. A few drops of water splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth near Khalid's sleeve. It was nothing. A minor inconvenience. But Khalid's eyes, cold and dark, narrowed into slits. He saw not an accident, but an affront. He picked up his glass, filled to the brim with a blood-red, vintage Bordeaux that cost more than Alara's monthly rent. A smirk played on his lips. "You need to learn to be more careful," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. And with a deliberate, theatrical flick of his wrist, he emptied the entire glass onto the front of Alara's clean white shirt. The red wine bloomed across the fabric like a grotesque flower, a declaration of his power and her insignificance. A collective gasp rippled through the nearby tables, followed by a heavy, uncomfortable silence. Khalid's friends snickered. Alara stood frozen, the cold, sticky liquid seeping through to her skin. The humiliation was a physical blow, hot and sharp. For a fleeting second, the world seemed to tilt, the carefully constructed walls of her composure threatening to crumble. The stain wasn't just on her shirt, it was on her dignity. Her manager, Mr. Davies, scurried over, his face a mask of panicked apology aimed squarely at Khalid. He didn't even look at Alara. "Mr. Al-Jamil, I am so terribly sorry. This is unacceptable. Her clumsiness will be dealt with, I assure you." He turned to Alara, his voice a venomous whisper. "Get to the back. Now. You are a disgrace." Khalid leaned back in his chair, a triumphant gleam in his eye. He had made his point. He had reminded a nobody of her place. He pulled out a thick money clip and peeled off a single, crisp bill, tossing it onto the table. "For the dry cleaning," he said with a dismissive wave, as if he had just performed an act of great charity. But Alara didn't move. She didn't look at the money. She didn't look at her fuming manager. She looked directly at Khalid Al-Jamil. Her eyes, which moments before had been carefully blank, now held a quiet, blazing fire. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. In that single, unwavering gaze, she communicated everything he had failed to see, that she was not a ghost, not an object, not a uniform. She was a person, and he had wounded her. Then, with a slow, deliberate grace that defied her station, she turned and walked away, her back straight, her head held high, leaving the billionaire's son to sit with the sudden, unsettling feeling that he had not won, but had lost something profoundly important. The walk to the staff locker room was the longest of Ilara's life. Each step was a battle against the tremor in her legs, each breath a struggle to keep the burning tears at bay. The laughter from Khalid's table echoed in her ears, a cruel soundtrack to her humiliation. In the cramped, dimly lit space that smelled of bleach and old coffee, she finally allowed her shoulders to slump. She stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, at the violent red stain that marred her uniform. It felt like a brand, marking her as clumsy, as worthless, as someone who could be casually defiled for sport. Mr. Davies burst in, his face contorted with fury. "What was that?" he hissed, his finger jabbing the air in front of her. "You stared him down. Do you have any idea who that is? He could buy this entire city block and turn it into a parking lot for his dog. You're lucky he didn't demand you be fired on the spot." Ilara's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "He did it on purpose," she said, her voice barely a whisper, but steady. "He spilled the wine on me deliberately," Davies scoffed, a harsh, grating sound. "And who do you think they're going to believe? The son of Tariq al-Jamil or a waitress who can't even pour water without making a mess? You're on your last warning, Ilara. Clean yourself up and get back out there. And if you so much as look in his direction again, you're finished." He stormed out, leaving her alone with the throbbing silence and the cold, damp stain. She changed into her spare shirt, the cheap cotton a poor substitute for the crisp linen she'd started her shift in. As she worked, she could feel Khalid's eyes on her, a smug, possessive gaze. She ignored him, focusing on the rhythm of her tasks: clear the plates, wipe the table, reset the silver. She built a fortress around herself, brick by brick, with each small, professional act. When her shift finally ended hours later, the city was dark and quiet. She walked the long blocks to the bus stop, the night air cool against her flushed cheeks. The incident replayed in her mind, not the spill itself, but the look in his eyes, the utter lack of humanity, the casual cruelty. It wasn't just about her. It was about how people like him saw people like her, as scenery, as tools, as less. She finally reached her small apartment, a third-floor walk-up in a building that had seen better decades. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of herbal tea and medication. Her mother was asleep in the small bedroom, her breathing shallow but steady. Ilara looked at her mother's peaceful face, the lines of pain softened by sleep, and the fire within her, which had been banked by exhaustion, flared anew. This was why she endured it. For this frail, fierce woman who had sacrificed everything for her. She went to the tiny kitchen sink and began to wash the stained shirt by hand, scrubbing at the deep red pigment with a cheap bar of soap. As she worked, her movements became less frantic, more methodical. This wasn't just a stain. It was a symbol. And she would not let it set. With every scrub, she was washing away not just the wine, but the humiliation, the feeling of powerlessness. She was reclaiming herself from the incident, refusing to let one man's arrogance define her worth. She would wear the shirt again, perhaps with a faint, ghostly shadow of the stains still visible, a reminder not of her shame, but of her resilience. She would go back to that restaurant tomorrow, and the day after, and she would hold her head high. Khalid al-Jamil had tried to make her feel small, but he had failed. He had inadvertently shown her the true depth of her own strength. As she hung the damp shirt to dry, she made a silent vow. She would not be invisible forever. One day, somehow, she would be seen. Unbeknownst to Ilara, to Khalid, and to the oblivious Mr. Davies, the entire, sordid affair had been witnessed. At a quiet corner table, partially obscured by a large potted palm, sat an older gentleman. He was dressed in a simple, impeccably tailored but unassuming suit. He nursed a single glass of tea, his presence so quiet and contemplative that he blended into the restaurant's elegant backdrop. No one knew he was Tariq Al-Jamil, the architect of the Al-Jamil Empire, a man whose name was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear in boardrooms across the globe. He had come to the restaurant unannounced, a habit he had developed to discreetly observe the operations of his many businesses. He had also come to observe his son. What he saw had filled him with a cold, creeping dread. He watched Khalid's preening arrogance, the way he treated the staff as if they were pieces of furniture, the hollow laughter that never reached his eyes. Tariq had built his empire from nothing, with his own 2 hands, guided by principles of honor, hard work, and above all, respect. He had always believed that a man's true character was revealed not in how he treats his equals, but in how he treats those he perceives as beneath him. And tonight, his son, the heir to everything he had built, had failed that test in the most spectacular and public way. He saw the slight bump of the waitress's arm, the insignificant splash of water. He saw the flicker of irritation on Khalid's face, followed by a cruel, calculated decision. He watched, his heart sinking with each passing second, as his son deliberately raised his wine glass. Tariq felt a hot surge of shame so profound it almost made him stand up and intervene. But he remained seated, a statue carved from disappointment, forcing himself to watch the poison he had apparently allowed to fester in his own family bloom into full view. He saw the wine splash, the girl's shocked stillness, the manager's craven response. But most of all, he saw her eyes. From across the room, he saw the fire in Alara's gaze as she looked at his son. It wasn't hatred or fear. It was something far more powerful. It was a quiet refusal to be broken. In that moment, he saw more strength and dignity in that young, wine-stained waitress than he had seen in his son in years. He watched her walk away, her posture unbent, and felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Not for his son, but for the possibility that true character still existed in the world, often in the most unexpected places. He paid his bill quietly and left without a word to anyone. The image of the girl's resilient eyes burned into his memory. He knew then that this was more than just an embarrassing incident. It was a crossroads. The future of his legacy was at stake, and the path forward had been illuminated not by his Ivy League-educated son, but by the quiet dignity of a waitress. Tariq Al-Jamil did not sleep that night. His mind, usually occupied with billion-dollar mergers and geopolitical market shifts, was consumed by a single, simple image: a red stain on a white shirt. The next morning, as the sun cast long shadows over the city, he did not summon his son for a lecture. Rage was a blunt instrument. What was needed now was precision and understanding. He sat in his penthouse office, a vast space of glass and steel that overlooked the sprawling metropolis, and made a single phone call. He spoke in quiet, measured tones to the head of his personal security and investigation team, a man who could unearth a secret from the heart of a stone. The instructions were simple. There was a waitress at the Elysian last night. Her name is Alara. I want to know everything about her. Her family, her history, her struggles, her dreams. Be discreet. I want the report on my desk by noon. The investigator, a man accustomed to digging up corporate espionage or vetting potential partners, was momentarily taken aback by the unusual request, but he simply replied, "Yes, Mr. Al-Jamil." As he waited, Tariq thought about the empire he had built. He had created thousands of jobs, constructed architectural marvels, and amassed a fortune that could alter the fates of nations. But what was the point of it all if the person who inherited it lacked a fundamental human decency? He had given Khalid everything: the best schools, unlimited funds, a seat on the board. He had tried to teach him the value of money, but he had clearly failed to teach him the value of people. By midday, a slim, encrypted file arrived on his tablet. Tariq opened it and began to read. The story it told was one of quiet, unrelenting struggle. Alara, 24 years old. Her father had passed away when she was a teenager. Her mother, a former university lecturer, was battling a chronic, degenerative illness that required expensive treatments not fully covered by insurance. Alara had been a scholarship student at the city's top business school, her grades impeccable, her professor's notes glowing with praise for her sharp, analytical mind. But she had been forced to drop out 2 years in, when her mother's condition worsened, to work full-time to pay for the medical care. She had taken the job at the Elysian, working double shifts, sacrificing her own future for her mother's present. There were no extravagant purchases, no social life to speak of, just a relentless cycle of work and care. Her employment record was spotless. She was punctual, diligent, and universally liked by her fellow low-level staff, who described her as kind and fiercely principled. The report was a portrait of quiet heroism, of a life of sacrifice lived without complaint. Tarek leaned back, a profound sadness settling over him. He juxtaposed this story with the image of his son tossing a $100 bill onto the table for dry cleaning. The chasm between them was staggering. He saw it all with a blinding clarity. The world saw a waitress. He saw a brilliant business mind forced into servitude by circumstance. He saw a leader, tested not in a boardroom but in the crucible of real life, who had proven her mettle. He saw the very qualities he had desperately tried to instill in his son: resilience, integrity, empathy, shining brightly in this young woman his son had tried to extinguish. The decision formed in his mind clear and absolute. This was no longer just about punishing Khalid. It was about rewarding virtue. It was about making a strategic investment, not in a company, but in a person. He would right this wrong, not with a simple apology or a handful of cash, but with an act so profound it would realign the very orbits of their lives. He picked up his phone again. This time, he called his son. Khalid's voice was thick with sleep and irritation when he answered. "Father?" "It's early." Tarek's tone was as cold and hard as granite. "Be in my office in 30 minutes. We have something to discuss." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy with dawning apprehension. Khalid knew that tone. It was the voice his father used just before he dismantled a rival corporation or fired a senior executive. It was the voice of judgment. Khalid arrived looking disheveled but still radiating an air of untouchable privilege. He slumped into one of the leather chairs opposite his father's immense desk, running a hand through his perfectly messy hair. "What's this about, father?" "I have a tea time at 11. Tarek didn't look up from the tablet in front of him. He let the silence stretch, a tactic he often used in negotiations to unnerve his opponents. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and dangerous. "Tell me about your dinner last night." Khalid shifted uncomfortably. "It was fine. The steak was a little overdone, but I'm not talking about the steak." Tarek cut in, his eyes finally lifting to meet his son's. They were like chips of ice. "I'm talking about the waitress." A flicker of annoyance crossed Khalid's face. "Oh, that? It was nothing. The girl was clumsy, I made a mess. I paid for it. It's handled." Tarek placed the tablet on the desk and slid it across the polished surface towards his son. On the screen was Ilara's file. "Her name is Ilara," Tarek said, his voice dangerously soft. "She is 24 years old. She was the top student in her business program before she had to drop out to pay for her mother's chemotherapy. She worked 60 hours a week so that her mother, a woman who dedicated her life to educating others, might live a few more months with some dignity. That $100 bill you threw at her? It wouldn't even cover a fraction of one of her mother's weekly prescriptions." Khalid's arrogance began to falter, replaced by a defensive posture. "How do you know all this? Are you having me followed now?" "I don't need to follow you, Khalid." Tarek's voice rose, the controlled anger finally cracking. "I was there. I saw it all. I saw you, my son, the heir to this entire enterprise, deliberately and cruelly humiliate a young woman for no other reason than to amuse your pathetic friends. You didn't see a person. You saw an inconvenience. You didn't see a woman struggling with a burden you cannot possibly imagine. You saw a uniform to be soiled." He stood up, his towering frame casting a long shadow over his son. "I have spent my life building this company on a foundation of respect. We treat our partners, our clients, and especially our employees with honor. It is the core of our success. And you, with one flick of your wrist, betrayed every principle I hold dear. You are not just a disgrace to me, you are a liability to this company. Your character is bankrupt. Khalid paled, shrinking under the weight of his father's fury. Father, I'm sorry. It was a mistake. A stupid joke, a joke? Tariq's voice was a low growl. You think a person's dignity is a joke? You have learned nothing. Wealth has made you soft and cruel. You have the title of a prince but the character of a peasant. He walked to the window, looking out over the city he had conquered. You believe your birthright makes you powerful. You are wrong. Power is not about how many people you command. It is about how many people you lift up. Last night you had a choice. You could have shown grace. You chose arrogance. You failed. With that, he turned back to his son, his face set like a death mask. You are suspended from the board, effective immediately. Your accounts are frozen. You will be given a basic living stipend. Your real education begins today. Khalid stared, speechless, as his world crumbled around him. He had mistaken his father's love for weakness, his wealth for a shield. He was only just beginning to understand how gravely he had miscalculated. Later that day, a sleek, black car, the kind that usually glided through the city's most affluent districts, navigated the narrow, cracked streets of Alara's neighborhood. It came to a stop in front of her rundown apartment building, its polished perfection a stark contrast to the surrounding decay. Tariq Al-Jamil stepped out, his tailored suit looking alien in this environment. He ignored the curious stares from passers-by and entered the building, his footsteps echoing in the dimly lit, linoleum-floored hallway. He climbed the 3 flights of stairs, his heart heavy with a sense of purpose. He knocked on her door, the sound surprisingly loud in the quiet building. The door opened a crack, and Alara peered out, her eyes widening in confusion and then recognition. She saw not the quiet man from the corner table, but the face she had seen in countless financial magazines, Tariq Al-Jamil. Fear, sharp and immediate, coursed through her. She thought he had come to have her fired, to finish the job his son had started. She braced herself, her hand tightening on the doorknob. Mr. Al-Jamil, she said, her voice strained. Can I help you? Tariq's expression was not angry or demanding, but gentle, almost mournful. Miss Alara, he said, his voice rich and respectful. May I have a moment of your time? I am here to apologize. Stunned into silence, she opened the door wider. He stepped into her tiny, immaculately clean apartment. It was sparse, furnished with second-hand items, but filled with a sense of warmth and care that was absent from his own palatial home. He saw a stack of business textbooks on a small coffee table, a testament to a dream deferred. His apology was not a brief platitude. It was a sincere, heartfelt confession of his shame and disappointment in his son's actions. There is no excuse for what happened, he said, his eyes meeting hers directly. My son's behavior was a reflection of my failure as a father. I am here to ask for your forgiveness, and to try and make amends. Alara listened, her initial fears slowly giving way to disbelief. This powerful, almost mythical figure was standing in her living room, apologizing to her. When he finished, she simply nodded, unable to find the words. He then held out a small velvet box. This is not a payment for your forgiveness, he said carefully. Please do not see it as such. It is an investment. An investment in potential that is being wasted. She opened the box. Inside was not jewelry, but a single, ornate key attached to a fob engraved with the address of the city's most luxurious residential tower, one of his own buildings. This is the key to a penthouse apartment, he explained, seeing the shock on her face. It is yours for as long as you need it. All expenses paid. Your mother will have access to the best medical concierge service in the city. I want you to be free of the burdens that have held you back. I want to give you back the time and space to think, to dream again. Alara stared at the key, then back at him, her mind reeling. I can't accept this. It's too much. It's charity, no, Tariq said firmly, his gaze unwavering. It is not charity. It is a foundation. I told you, this is an investment. And I expect a return on it. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. The apartment is simply the first part of my proposal. The second part is a job. Alara's breath hitched. She expected an offer to be a head waitress, a manager perhaps. What he said next shattered her every expectation. My son's behavior has shown me a sickness in my own company. A culture of entitlement that starts at the top and rots everything below. My executives are blind to it because they live inside it. You, Miss Alara, have seen it from the other side. You have lived it. Your perspective is more valuable to me right now than that of any of my C-suite officers. He leaned forward slightly, his voice filled with an urgent intensity. I want to hire you as a special consultant, reporting directly to me. I will pay you a salary that reflects the value of your insight, not your previous position. Your first task is this. I want you to spend 1 month observing my hospitality division. The hotels, the restaurants. Talk to the staff. The cleaners, the busboys, the doormen. Find the rot. Find the source of the disrespect that my son displayed so openly. And then I want you to present a plan to the board of directors on how to fix it. Alara was speechless. It was an impossible offer, a fairy tale proposition. Just yesterday, she was a nobody, a waitress humiliated for sport. Today, one of the most powerful men in the world was offering her a chance to reshape his empire. She looked from the key in her hand to the textbooks on her table, the symbols of her past life and her abandoned dreams. This was more than a job, more than a penthouse. It was a lifeline. It was a chance to prove that the person inside the uniform was always more important than the uniform itself. For the first time in years, a genuine, radiant smile spread across her face. Yes, she said, her voice clear and strong. Yes, Mr. Al-Jamil. I accept. The transition was dizzying. One day, Alara was waking before dawn to catch a bus to a job where she was paid to be invisible. The next, she was waking in a sun-drenched penthouse apartment with a panoramic view of the city skyline, a city that had suddenly, miraculously, opened itself up to her. The first week was spent settling her mother into the new apartment, where a dedicated nurse and on-call doctors attended to her every need. For the first time, Alara saw the lines of worry on her mother's face begin to soften, replaced by a look of peace she hadn't seen in years. You have a gift, my daughter, her mother told her, her voice stronger than it had been in a long time. Not just a sharp mind, but a good heart. This man, Mr. Al-Jamil, he did not see a waitress. He saw that heart. With her mother safe and cared for, Alara turned her full attention to the monumental task before her. Armed with a simple ID badge that granted her unrestricted access to any Al-Jamil property, she began her investigation. She didn't start in the boardrooms or with the regional managers. She started where her own journey had begun, in the trenches. She traded her new, tailored business attire for the simple, functional clothes of the staff, blending in. She spent a day with the housekeeping crew at a 5-star hotel, learning how they were timed to the second, often skipping breaks to meet impossible quotas. She heard stories of wealthy guests leaving rooms in states of utter chaos, knowing someone else, someone they would never see, would clean up their mess. She spent a night shift with the kitchen porters, the true unsung heroes of the culinary world, scrubbing pots and pans in a hot, steamy basement, their hard work completely hidden from the glamorous dining rooms above. She sat in staff break rooms, sharing coffee and listening. The stories poured out of them, a torrent of quiet indignities. They spoke of managers who disciplined them in front of guests, of patrons who snapped their fingers to get their attention, of a system that rewarded them for being silent and invisible. She discovered a pervasive us versus them mentality. The management saw the staff as replaceable cogs in a machine. The staff saw the management as out-of-touch authoritarians. There was no sense of a shared mission. Morale was abysmal, which led to high turnover, which in turn led to inconsistent service, the very thing the brand prided itself on. The problem was exactly as Tariq had suspected. The sickness of entitlement, embodied by his son Khalid, was a cancer that had metastasized throughout the corporate culture. It wasn't about a lack of training manuals or inefficient protocols. It was a fundamental lack of human dignity. As she gathered her data, not in spreadsheets but in handwritten notebooks filled with names and stories, she began to formulate a plan. It was radical, simple, and completely antithetical to the established corporate hierarchy. It wasn't about new rules, it was about a new philosophy. Her biggest obstacle came in the form of Mr. Davies, her old manager from the Elysian. Tariq, in a move of strategic irony, had assigned him to be her official liaison. Davies treated her with a fawning, superficial respect that was far more insulting than his previous contempt. He saw her as a fluke, a temporary pet project of the big boss. "Miss Alara," he would say, his smile never reaching his cold eyes, "surely you're not wasting your time talking to the dishwashers. The real insights are in our quarterly reports." He tried to steer her towards meetings with executives and analysts, but she politely but firmly refused. "The numbers in your reports don't tell you why your best housekeeper quit last week," she told him calmly. "But Maria, who shared a locker with her for 5 years, can." Her persistence and her genuine empathy for the staff began to earn their trust. They saw that she wasn't a corporate spy, but one of them. She was their voice. After a month of tireless work, she had compiled her findings. She created a presentation, but it contained no pie charts or corporate jargon. It was a presentation built on faces, names, and stories. It was a mirror she was about to hold up to the board of directors, and she knew the reflection would be ugly. The day of the board meeting arrived. Alara walked into the cavernous, wood-paneled room on the top floor of the Al Jamil Tower. A long, polished table was surrounded by a dozen stern-faced men and women in expensive suits. At the far end of the table sat Khalid, looking sullen and resentful, forced to attend by his father. Mr. Davies stood nervously by the projector. At the head of the table sat Tariq Al-Jamil, his face an unreadable mask. He simply nodded at Alara, a silent gesture of support. The air was thick with skepticism. They looked at her, this former waitress, and saw an absurdity. The chief financial officer, a man named Marcus Thorne, leaned back in his chair with a dismissive smirk. "Let's see what the voice of the people has to tell us," he murmured to the person next to him, just loud enough for Alara to hear. Alara took a deep breath, walked to the front of the room, and turned to face them. She didn't start with a greeting or a corporate pleasantry. She started with a story. "3 weeks ago," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I met a man named Hector. He's been a doorman at the Grand Al Jamil Hotel for 25 years. He knows the names of every regular guest's children. He once ran 6 blocks in the rain to return a teddy bear a little girl had left in a taxi. Last year, his wife passed away. Not a single person from corporate management sent a card or attended the service. 2 days after the funeral, his direct supervisor wrote him up for being 2 minutes late. Hector told me, they don't see me as a person. They see me as part of the door." As she spoke, a picture of Hector, a kind-faced man with a warm smile, appeared on the screen behind her. For the next hour, she told them more stories. The story of the housekeeper who used her own money to buy a specific brand of tea for an elderly guest she knew liked it. The story of the kitchen porter who was a talented artist but had no time to pursue his passion because he had to work 2 jobs. She painted a vivid picture of an army of dedicated, passionate employees who were being systematically demoralized by a culture that treated them as invisible. She then brought up a slide with a single image, her own wine-stained shirt from that fateful night. The room fell silent. Khalid flinched as if he'd been struck. "This," Alara said, gesturing to the screen, "is not a dry-cleaning issue. This is a symptom of the core disease. It is what happens when people in power believe that the people who serve them are not their equals in humanity. This belief, this arrogance, trickles down. Managers emulate it. It creates an environment of fear, not loyalty. It breeds resentment, not excellence. And it is costing you millions." Thorne, the CFO, scoffed. "Costing us millions? That's a rather dramatic claim. Our profits are at an all-time high, are they?" Alara countered, her confidence growing. Your turnover rate in service staff is 35%, double the industry average. The cost of recruiting and training new employees alone is astronomical. Your online reviews consistently mention that while the facilities are beautiful, the service feels cold or impersonal. You are losing the loyalty of the very customers you seek to impress. You are operating a luxury brand with a decaying soul. She then laid out her plan. It was called the Dignity Initiative. It wasn't about bonuses or pay raises, though she recommended a review. It was about a cultural revolution. An employee-led council to voice concerns directly to the board. A Story of the Month program to highlight acts of service like Hector's, celebrated publicly and rewarded. A reverse mentorship program where senior executives would be required to spend 1 day a month working alongside the cleaning staff, the kitchen porters, the bellhops. You need to see your employees, she declared, her voice ringing with passion. You need to learn their names, hear their stories. You need to stop seeing them as uniforms and start seeing them as the human beings who are the true heart of this company. A heated debate erupted. Thorne called her proposals sentimental nonsense. Others called them impractical. Khalid sat in stony silence, his face a mixture of shame and fury. Through it all, Tariq Al-Jamil listened without saying a word. Finally, when the arguments died down, he stood up. Marcus, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. You see numbers. She sees people. For years I have listened to your numbers, and something has always felt hollow. Today I heard the truth. He turned to the board. Elara is right. We have become a company with a decaying soul. We have mistaken luxury for humanity. Effective immediately, the Dignity Initiative is approved. Elara will be appointed to the newly created position of Chief Culture Officer, with a full seat on this board, to oversee its implementation. A wave of shock went through the room. Elara felt her knees go weak. Tariq wasn't finished. He looked down the table at his son. And as for the reverse mentorship program, he said, his voice devoid of all warmth, its first participant will be Khalid. He will be starting next week. In the laundry room of the Grand Al Jamil Hotel, the transformation of the Al Jamil hospitality empire was not instantaneous, but it was profound. Under Elara's leadership, the Dignity Initiative began to slowly heal the company's soul. The employee councils became a powerful force for positive change, bridging the gap between the suites and the staff rooms. The Story of the Month program became a source of immense pride, with employees like Hector finally receiving the recognition they had long deserved. Executives who initially grumbled about their day in the trenches came back humbled and with a newfound respect for the relentless hard work that underpinned their profits. They started using names instead of just barking orders. Small gestures of kindness began to ripple through the organization. As for Khalid, he spent 6 months working his way through the company's least glamorous jobs. He washed sheets, scrubbed floors, and polished silver. For the first time in his life, he was invisible, judged not by his name but by the quality of his work. He was humbled, broken down, and then slowly rebuilt. He learned the names of his coworkers, heard their stories, and began to see the world through their eyes. The arrogance was stripped away, replaced by a quiet empathy. He saw firsthand the damage his own past behavior had caused. One day, he sought Elara out, not in the boardroom, but in the staff cafeteria. He apologized, not with the glibness of before, but with a raw, genuine remorse that brought tears to his eyes. It was the beginning of his own redemption. Elara, now a respected and powerful executive, never lost the perspective she had gained behind an apron. She moved her mother into a comfortable home near a beautiful park, where she lived out her days in peace and comfort. Elara never forgot where she came from. She made a point of having lunch in the staff cafeteria once a week, not as a publicity stunt, but to listen, to stay connected to the heartbeat of the company. She proved that empathy wasn't a soft skill, it was a superpower. She showed that the best business strategies are rooted in human dignity. Her journey from a wine-stained waitress to a transformative leader became a quiet legend within the company, a modern fable taught to every new hire. It was a story that reminded everyone that a person's worth is not defined by their job title or the clothes they wear, but by the contents of their character. So, what is the lesson in all of this? It's a simple one, but one we so often forget. Look closer. The person serving you coffee, cleaning your office, or driving your taxi has a story as rich and complex as your own. They had dreams they've chased, burdens they carry, and a quiet strength you may never see unless you choose to. Value is not determined by a price tag or a position. True value lies in a person's integrity, their resilience, their capacity for kindness. The world will try to put you in a box, to label you, to judge you by your uniform. But you, and only you, define who you are. The next time you have the chance, look past the apron, past the name tag, and see the person standing before you. And if you know someone who feels invisible, who feels judged by their station in life, share this story with them. Remind them that a single moment of being truly seen can change everything. Because every person, in every role, deserves to be recognized not for what they do, but for who they are.